Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sean Northup. I'm the Deputy Director of the Metropolitan Planning Organization. Just wanted to come up and thank you all for coming here. We've felt the world opening up a little bit more after COVID and felt the need to bake some of these speaker series into our projects that are going on this year. We did a 2018 strategic plan. And for those of you who don't know, metropolitan planning organizations are, by statute, pretty focused on transportation. They were formed when the highway bill went through. They were funded by the Highway Trust Fund, and central to our job at a metropolitan planning organization is to make sure that Highway Trust Fund dollars that come back to our region get spent in a timely manner on projects that have a regional impact to central Indiana. So the whole idea was when that federal gas tax money goes back to a region, they wanted local elected officials to be making decisions about where that money gets spent, not necessarily people at the state or the federal level. So our board is made up of the cities and towns and counties in central Indiana. We reach from kind of the northern end of Hamilton County down to almost Columbus. From Greenfield to the east and Danville on the west. We have over 1.5 million people that live in our region. And back in the 60s, when that highway bill passed, the idea was for these organizations to be much broader than just transportation, to fold in environmental money. At the time, the EPA didn't quite exist yet, to fold in housing work. HUD didn't quite exist in its current form yet. And those organizations didn't form regional governance structures the same way that the Department of Transportation did. And as things have evolved, that money has become more and more siloed. And organizations have started looking at housing as one issue, and transportation as a separate issue, and land use as a separate issue. And over the last 10 years, we have felt that really swing back. And the federal money has become more flexible. The newest transportation bill that came out said MPOs need to have a major focus on participating in understanding and solving the housing crisis and understanding environmental impacts of the investments that we're making. And so in our 2018 strategic plan, we were taking account of where we were and began understanding that we had partnerships with groups like MIBOR and groups like the Hoosier Environmental Council, and we were already doing considerable amount of work outside of just transportation planning, and so we decided to formalize that in our structure. And so this year we're doing a regional housing plan, which is a pretty novel scale for a housing approach in our region. Housing authority lies with local government. We're not proposing to change that in any way. We're just offering a different perspective on the issue. So we're thrilled that you're here today. We're thrilled to have Allie Wolf here. I wanted to bring up our project manager first. Andrea Miller is running this project for the MPO. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sean. My name is Andrea Miller, the project manager for the Central Indiana Housing Study, and I'm really excited to have you all here today to talk a little bit more about housing. So this housing speaker event comes as part of a series, as Sean mentioned, and we are also pairing this event with an open house. So the way this event will flow is that we'll have our speaker come up, she'll talk to you all, we'll have a Q&A session. You all will have the opportunity to ask your questions, and then we'll transition into the open house section of this event. So I'll be providing more information about the Central Indiana Housing Study itself after the Q&A session. But of course, the event we're here for today, I'd like to introduce you all to Allie Wolf. So Allie Wolf is the chief economist for Zonda, the largest new home construction data company in North America. As head of the economics department, Allie manages and analyzes the content for Zonda, runs special research projects, strategizes with the nation's largest home builders, and presents nationwide, covering topics across the housing market and wider economy. Allie is the creator of Zonda's proprietary indices, including the New Home Pending Sales Index and the New Home Lot Supply Index. She's highly regarded as an industry expert. Allie is quoted frequently in national publications, and she also advises to the White House, providing data and insights on the U.S. housing market. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Allie.
Thank you, Andrea, and hello, everyone. I am delighted to be here to go through the state of the housing market and wider economy. So I have 30 minutes today. I want to make sure I set my timer. But before I go into my presentation, just real quick, as mentioned, Chief Economist with Zonda. If you're not overly familiar with Zonda, we are a housing data and consultancy firm. We track the entire building life cycle from raw land all the way up to the closing out of new home communities. Now, while our proprietary data comes from the new home side, we know to make sense of the market, we also have to look at the existing home market, what's happening in the economy, what's happening with policy. So in my 30 minutes today, we're going to go through a little bit of all of that. We're going to start high level with the economic backdrop. We'll then talk about how the economic backdrop is playing into mortgage rates and playing into home sales, supply, and affordability. From there, we'll talk about solutions. What can we do when we look at some of the challenges with affordability? We know that it's severe all across the country, including here locally. And then we'll finish with our final thoughts. So as we step back and go high level with the economic backdrop, the first thing that we can partially celebrate is that the Fed met today, and we know that the Fed ended up holding. So we've seen 11 short-term rate increases so far. That's since last March. But what you have to remind yourself is, why has the Federal Reserve been raising rates? Well, they've been raising rates because as they look at what is happening in the economy, and as they look at what's happening with inflation, they feel that growth has been too high. If you look at the year so far, nationally, we've averaged 240,000 jobs added each month. Most recent report came out, 187,000, so just the most modest signs of slowing. But if you look at the unemployment rate, we see that nationally it's gone up to 3.8%. But an important thing to understand is that the unemployment rate went up because more people entered the labor force. So the Fed is looking at that and they're not saying, okay, that's indicative of a broad-based slowdown. It's actually just that market dynamics are shifting. If you look at the local economy, unemployment rate here, 3.3%. So we're outpacing or have a lower unemployment rate than the national. And you have the same thing that's happening when you look at overall job growth. So nationally right now, we have 3% more jobs than we had going into the pandemic. Here locally, we have 5% more jobs. So there's a couple metrics that are showing that Indianapolis is outperforming what we're seeing on the high level data, but I have a couple more metrics that continue to hit that point. When we think about the housing market, what we also like to look at is high income jobs. To calculate this, we look at what's happening in information and technology and professional and business services. Nationally, 6% more jobs going into the pandemic. Locally, 9% more. If you look at the national distribution, 22% of the jobs are high income. Here locally, 24%. So across most measures, what we're finding is that Indianapolis is outperforming. Now, if you look at this though, we know that employment is important, but then we want to take it another step further. What are we seeing with incomes? Well, 70% of local households earn under $100,000. And if you look at Indianapolis on a national rank, it ranks at 190th. So not leading the way in terms of wage growth. In fact, it's falling behind the national average. But a really important cut of the data is that we're 7% below the national median household income, and the cost of living is 7% below the national cost of living. So it does actually show that you're keeping pace with what we're seeing in the broader picture. Now, as we talk about incomes, as I go into the housing section, we're gonna layer in incomes with home prices to see if there's a match between those two or if we're seeing some imbalances. But before we get there, we have to go back to that discussion of the Federal Reserve meeting. What are they going to do? Raise rates, cut rates, pause. One of the key things that has kept the Federal Reserve up at night is what's happening with inflation. Now again, if you look at the inflation rate in the Midwest compared to the national average, outperforming again. So a lower level of inflation, not seeing the costs rise as much, but we are still seeing that that's above the Fed's target. You see that nationally, you see that locally. And we think that could mean we could have one more rate increase from the Federal Reserve as they're looking at the data and still just don't feel comfortable that the market has slowed enough. So we look at all of this, but we're here to talk about housing. So why did I start high level? Well, I started there because it does not matter to me where you live across the country. What's happening on the national basis is impacting all of us across the country. And that's because what the Federal Reserve is doing is raising those short-term interest rates. That's one of the reasons interest rates have gone up. But also, inflation is another reason that interest rates have gone up. And we have market dysfunction that's also pushing those rates up. So last year, we truly had that shock where we had gone from 3% interest rates to 6 to 7. And then we kind of steadied out. Throughout this year, up until about 4 to 6 weeks ago, we were just in the 6s. And I hate to say just in the 6s, because if you were active in the market when interest rates were 3, clearly it feels very different. But right now, we've now been in a place where interest rates have gone back up to 7%. And what this means, nationally, just since the beginning of last year, the monthly payment has gone up 70%. Here in Indianapolis, the monthly payment has gone up 75% just since the beginning of last year. That's accounting for higher interest rates, that's accounting for higher home prices. So you look at this, and I think the worst thing is not one of you said, wow, because that is a massive, huge affordability shock. This should be a wake-up call about how bad things are. So we look at this and we say, okay, well, how can people buy? This has got to be impacting home sales, and it absolutely is. When you look at existing home sales, this is the largest part of the market, we find that sales are down year over year. We find that sales are down compared to 2019. If you look at Indianapolis, and it almost doesn't matter where you are across the country, you're finding all of these markets down year over year and down from 2019. Now, throughout today's presentation, I'm going to be making that reference to 2019. We don't think any of the pandemic years were good years for comparison, but we know 2019 was a healthy time for housing history, so we're going to draw that line. So we look at this. Okay, yes, rates are impacting sales. That affordability metric is impacting sales. Confidence, there are so many people that are saying, I want to buy, but you want me to pay that much for that? People are just saying that doesn't make sense. So people are waiting on the sidelines. But a huge part of the discussion is inventory. So again, if you track out inventory nationally and locally, we find that the market is down, but the numbers to me are so amazing. In Indy, according to Realtor.com, the active listings down 40% compared to 2019. And had they been doing the housing study in 2019, I would have said inventory was even tight then. It was restraining some activity. It makes sense why inventory is down though. Think about people that bought over the past few years or refinanced over the past few years. Of individuals that have a mortgage, 80% have a mortgage rate under 5%. 60% have a mortgage rate under 4%. And they're basically saying, why do you want me to reset my interest rate? Why would I sell this house, get rid of 4%, and go into 7%? 7% if you're lucky. So we're finding that there's this disincentive to sell, where some people are saying, I feel stuck. I wish I could move, but I can't. Some people are saying, well, I'll just remodel. This will work. I have the house. I'll just remodel it. And some people are holding on to one home as a rental, so keeping from the supply pool, but maybe still active as a buyer, pooling from supply at the same time. So you look at this. I mean, it's not a great environment in the resale side for the reasons that we've talked about, but it doesn't mean that there aren't still people that want to buy. In fact, when we looked at 2020 before the pandemic, we had forecasted that it would be a good year for housing just based on demographics. You really can't fight some of the demographic trends of the millennials in particular aging into those prime home buying years. So we say, okay, well, what's happening in the new home side? There are people that are saying, I want to buy a house, the resale market isn't offering it, so I can turn to a newly constructed home. When we look at new home sales, we're up year over year. We're up compared to 2019, which should ring to you as the complete opposite as what I just said on the existing, down year over year, down from 2019. Look at that trend. We had troughed last year. We had a very dramatic drop in home sales last year, and the market has only gone up, despite the fact that interest rates have been in the 7%. This should stand out to you as unusual. What is going on? Why is this happening? Well, what we know is that demand went down. We experienced that last year. The housing market had gone through a recession. In particular, the new home had gone into a recession. As we look at it though, supply has come down even more. And so when you look at what's happening with home prices, you may be surprised that home prices are going back up so far this year. Existing homeowners that have homes feel like they're sitting on gold. They want to ask for more money for their home. And builders have become an increasingly large part of overall activity. Traditionally, home builders represented between 10 and 15% of the market. Today, because resale inventory is so tight, builders now represent 30% of all of the homes available. That is why this chart does not match with the fact that rates have gone up and the Fed thought for certain that they were going to directly be impacting the housing market. Now let's look at this a little bit further. If you want to look at sales adjusted for supply, I think the best metric to do this is the average sales rate. This is looking at if a builder has homes to sell, how well are they selling? Remember, 2019, healthy year, 2021, height of the market, and then we have current. As we look at the data for Indianapolis, above 21, above 2019. Yet again, another data set that doesn't make sense. How are we above 2021 sales when interest rates were 3% then and they're 7% now? Well, think back. In 2021, there was so much demand that builders capped sales. They said, I could sell 25 this month, I'm gonna sell 1 because I don't have enough homes. So really that's an apples to oranges comparison. My key takeaway here is if you look at sales in Indy, well above where we were in 2019. So you look at this and you say, okay, well there's certain segments of the market that's still doing well. We're still seeing certain buyers that are active. But I think the most important thing is understanding who are the active buyers. Relocation buyers, they're active. High income buyers, they're active. Someone buying off of wealth, off of home equity, of their stocks, they're active. Move up buyers, active. Investors, active. And who isn't? Not to say we don't have first time buyers shopping or income buyers shopping or these other buyers, but there's one group next to the blue arrows that's still able to contribute to home prices going up today, where this other group, in a lot of instances, locals, that are feeling like they're getting pushed to the sidelines of the market. Which to me really then begs the need to talk a little bit more about what we're seeing. What is the challenge when it comes to housing affordability? Because we can say, okay, great, in some cases we're seeing the new home market outperforming, but we know that the top hurdles today are related to interest rates and they're related to home prices. If you look at local home prices, we've seen, depending on if you're looking at the new or existing home market, between 25 and 30% just home price growth over the past 5 years. Remember, when you layer in the payment shock, that's a 70% change. This is just looking at home prices. Let's look at entry level. Let's say someone is looking for a home that's more attainable, more reasonable in the bottom third of the new home market. Traditionally, what we saw in Indianapolis going into the pandemic is an entry-level new home could be found here for about $200,000. Today, if you look at the bottom third of the market, we're no longer talking $200,000, we're talking about $300,000 for that entry level. Now we could say, okay, well there's been wage growth over that period of time too, but in a few moments we'll show you adjusting for wages, how that's doing with keeping up with home prices. But let me reinforce this point one more time. This is looking at new home contract sales by price. So we like contract sales because this can give us both the demand for the product but also the supply for the product. What you're looking at are the different buckets, and I think the top two are the ones I want you to focus on. The top line, the blue, the teal, is the $200,000 to $300,000 price point. The yellow is the $300,000 to $400,000 price point. So in this market, that was kind of bread and butter before the pandemic. By the way, I travel every single week across the country. You are so lucky because that does not happen in most areas across the country. Challenges, it's changed. The distribution looks a lot different. So now look at that blue line. That blue line again was 200 to 300,000. That used to be 35% of the market. Today it's 14% of the market. Look at the yellow line. That is the 300 to 400,000. That used to be 32% of the market. Now it's 40% of the market. 400 to 500,000, that's the blue that you're seeing, the more saturated blue heading up. The $400,000 to $500,000 category used to be 18% of the market, now it's over 30. So we're seeing that the distribution is changing, but let's go back to what I said. Oh, but incomes are going up. We don't need to worry that much about it. Okay, well, let's adjust it. Let's look at what we saw with home prices, and now let's calculate out the payment, and now let's look at household incomes, and now let's figure out how aligned these two numbers are. So what you're looking at here is that payment to income ratio. Ideally, you want to have 30%. At a stretch point, you're at 35%. What I've shown here, Nashville, Raleigh, Indy's in yellow, San Antonio, Dallas, Phoenix. These are markets that I would say are kind of similar to your market, but have experienced growth to a different extent. If you go back to the mid-2000s, it was a 14% payment to income ratio. So that's very low, very healthy. That kind of ties with what we had talked about of, okay, the home prices were lower and that's unusual across the country. Now what you're finding is that Indianapolis is up to 25%. Now notice, you stand out as being below the dotted line, below that 30%, and below some comparison markets, but notice how uncharted this is. This is not something that this market has dealt with, and that is looking at a market as a whole. If you're looking at somewhere that is safe, that has good homes, that has good schools, that has good access to transportation, you're probably not looking at 25%. That's probably understating the reality on the ground. But moving from 14 to 25, massive shift. Now let's add a couple caveats here. Because what this data will not do is account for people that are moving in. It does not account for relocation incomes that we'll talk about in just a moment. It does not account for some individuals that are able to tap their equity and roll that into a new home, and maybe their payment is not based on 20% down, maybe it's based on 50% down. But to me, as you look at this, it's all about perspective. Who is looking at this chart? If you're looking at this chart and you were born and raised here, this is not good. If you're looking at this chart, but you were born and raised most other places across the country, this is a huge opportunity. You feel like, oh my gosh, housing is so cheap here. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing that translate into people saying, well, where's the next best place? Where can I go? Well, Indianapolis makes sense. What this is showing you is the percent of people that are on Realtor.com that are searching for homes here locally. Notice, it's almost an equal percentage. 45% of the searches are coming from within the market. 43% of the searches are coming from a different state. What state? Number 1, New York. Number 2, Chicago. Number 3, Washington, D.C. What's happening with those incomes? Look at those incomes relative to here. DC's the second bar, New York's the third bar, Chicago's the fourth bar. All of them have a higher income. They're coming here and saying, that payment to income ratio is nothing. A home for $400,000, that's nothing. Because they have a different frame of reference and because they have different equity to tap. Now, if you notice San Francisco's household income double that of here in Indianapolis, but also only 2% of the searches. So I wouldn't say it's everyone from San Francisco coming here and changing the market, not true, but you could see how there's really no sensitivity to price if you do have someone coming from that side of the country. So you have people moving here, and we know that that was turbocharged during the pandemic, but what we're also having is people leaving here. And so when you look at the market, again, when you look at where are people searching on Redfin, about 50% of people live in Indianapolis and are looking for a home in Indianapolis. But you have 36% of people that live in Indianapolis and are saying, well, where else can I go? 15% that are saying, I'll look somewhere within the state, but maybe not necessarily within the metro. Where are people looking? Well, here what you're looking at, a few of the responses I think will just be based on lifestyle. Some people just want to move to Tampa for one reason or another. Some people just want to move to Chicago, maybe like the bigger city lifestyle, whatever it may be. So sometimes it's not about affordability. But look at the other places, Louisville, St. Louis, Fort Wayne. There's people that are saying, you know what, I wanted to live here, I wanted to buy a home here, but I'm getting pushed out. Because if I want to have the house that I want, or if I want to convert to homeownership, I have to think about what else to do. Now what this is resulting in is domestic net migration that is positive here, but barely. So let me explain how to look at this chart. This is telling you if you're above the dotted line, you have more people moving in than moving out. If you look at the yellow line, I think that's a good example, Raleigh. You probably have read about it in the news, lots of people moving to Raleigh, and you can see big bursts of growth. They've had a lot of people, more people moving in than moving out. If you look for the purple line, just a little bit above the black dotted line is where you'll find Indianapolis. Let me put it in a very simple term. We have 6 people that move in every day on average to Indianapolis. Now that's accounting for people that are leaving. So in a way that's actually good, because there are some markets where they have 400 people moving in every day. And you can imagine how that becomes a lot harder to handle, a lot harder to plan for than if you have 6 people. You know there's growth, you know you got to plan for growth, but you also have some time to plan for it. So as we go through all of this, okay, we understand the issue. We've seen affordability cut in 6 different ways in this presentation. What can be done? Well, in some cases, you have people that will have to compromise. Maybe someone doesn't want to live with their family, doesn't want to live with roommates, but because of affordability, they have to. Maybe someone has to take on a second job. Maybe someone will take a home in a location that they don't want, or they're going to take a home that needs to be remodeled. Maybe they're going to leave the market. We know some people are doing that. And maybe they'll need to continue to rent. So if you look at the effective rents here locally, the US is the blue line, Indy is the purple line. So you can see the overall rents are below what we're finding in the national average. But during the height of the pandemic, renters were experiencing almost 20% year-over-year rent growth. Massive. And that was because occupancy rose to 97%. So of the units that were available, they were filled. And so the landlords could raise the rents. For good news, we do have the occupancy level has come down to 94%, which has translated to rent growth at 5%. But put yourself in the shoes of someone renting that had 20% rent growth. Now they have 5% rent growth, and they ultimately want to become a homeowner, but it becomes harder and harder every day when you have to put more of your income towards living in sometimes the exact same unit. So what are people doing? For people that say, and we know this from consumer research, renting is great for a lot of people. Some people want to rent forever, but the majority of people we talk to at some point do want to convert to become homeowners. And how are they going to do it? Well, consumers are saying, I'll compromise. Give me a smaller home. I'll stretch my budget. I'll put more than what I should be doing towards housing to become a homeowner. Maybe I'll consider different loans. I don't need a 30-year fixed. Give me something else, maybe a lower rate that I can start with now. So consumers are playing their part. Builders are trying to work with them. I think that's part of the reason, again, that we've seen that share where builders have increased their share. Builders are saying, I'll buy down your rate. Maybe I'll lower the price. Maybe I'll help you with some of the closing cost funds. But we know that that's a Band-Aid. That's not a solution. So what are builders saying? Well, we'll build smaller homes. We'll build more spec homes. We'll build a home that's not as nice as what it originally was. But if the requirement is to get the price point down, these are some of the solutions that the builders are willing and able to do as well. Let's go back to that first point. Yes, we're building smaller homes. If you think back to the pandemic, there was this discussion. Everyone wants a larger home. Everyone's working from home and gymming from home and watching movies at home, and they want more square footage. Well, what builders realized is that was more temporary. The more long-term thing is that actually we need to get the home square footage down because that's going to be our best solution to helping with affordability. When you look at national home sizes, we're down 10% compared to last year. Sorry, let me put this back. Down 10%. If you look at Indy, home size is down 10% as well. So falling right in line with that national average. Now there's going to be 2 different ways that a home size will be felt by a consumer. Part 1, there will be some builders that just say, just make it smaller. Make a box and make it smaller. We can just get the better price point. That's not good for the consumers. That's a smaller square footage that's just going to be less of a good quality product. It's not as big of a product. It's not as nice of a product. But you also have builders that will say, reimagine the floor plan. Look at the dead space. There are so many homes. Maybe some of you live in it where there's rooms you don't use, hallways you don't use, there's inefficient, there's dead space. If a builder is bringing down the home size by doing that, by looking at the most efficient way to build a home, that's actually good for consumers because they get a better home and they're able to get a slightly better price. Now, what about attached? Now, attached is tricky because if you talk to consumers, overwhelmingly, they all want single-family detached homes. Some people will say, you know what, if I need to, though, I'll take an attached home. But it also comes with a little bit of a challenge, which is the HOA, which sometimes can impact that monthly payment. Well, nationally, what we're finding is 21% of homes are attached. Here locally, it's 14%. So as I look at it, may not work for everyone, it's not a perfect solution, but when you're looking for segmentation, when you're looking for different kinds of homes that can be within a community, this is a way that can work. And by the way, I feel so positive about your market relative to most markets because of what we showed with the history. The history being you have had more attainable, more reasonable home prices for a long period of time. Now let me explain why I think that's good. You can learn in this market from markets that have dealt with affordability worse than you have now for decades. There are architects, there are land planners, there are city officials, there are builders, there are developers that know how to solve for this, and by the way, know how to solve for it extremely well. Now, this may not be your jam, maybe you don't want an attached home, but this is an example of a product that if you look at how it looks inside, you still have windows, you still have outside space, it still lives wide. Oftentimes you want width for the house to feel good. Now this home is in California. It's 1,800 square feet, it's going for $1 million. So we don't want it to be $1 million here. It wouldn't be $1 million here in most locations, but the architects know. They know how to make it live well. They know how to make it work. All right, California, of course, we knew that was going to be the extreme example. Let's go to Colorado. Colorado is more recently experiencing the affordability challenges that match up with what you would find in some of the coasts. Now, the home that you're looking at here is called a wee cottage, like a little cottage. And this home was selling before the pandemic in the 300,000s. And I remember seeing pictures of this before the pandemic and like, really? Like people want that? It doesn't have a garage. The garage is detached oftentimes, or they have a parking pad. When I went to tour these homes before the pandemic, so the market was not as hot as what it was, I couldn't talk to a sales agent. There were families that were there. There were people that were saying, I want this house, I need this house, I want the school district, I want this neighborhood. I know, there's some faces. Yes, this house. And now, by the way, this house is selling for $500,000. It's 1,200 square feet in Colorado. That's not even talking about California. This is what I think is the biggest wake-up call. We talked about growth, and we talked about having smart growth, and how you guys are lucky that it's only 6 people moving in per day versus 400 because you can plan for it. There are some markets across the country that cannot plan for it. They did not have the luxury to have some of the foresight to think about it. San Antonio is one of those examples. It's a city that connects to Austin. We know what happened to Austin. People are going to San Antonio. Things got so bad so quickly. This is their solution to affordability. This is a 300 square foot, single family detached house without a garage. The reason we're meeting here today is that this doesn't happen, that we don't get to the point that the market gets so ahead of us, that we have the conversations early, we have the conversations of what can we do. I think this doesn't even do it justice for how small it is. Really think of a 1-bedroom apartment just living on its own plot of land. That's what this is. So now that I've thoroughly scared you, and with 2 minutes left, Andrea, 1 second, the last thing I want to say is just going back to what I just finished with. You guys right now are living in the 13th state for America's top states to do business. When you look at the US News and World Report, you look at Indianapolis, you look at Fort Wayne, you look at South Bend, best places to live, most affordable places to live, best places to retire. We saw the employment data outperforming the national average. We saw that there are more people moving in than moving out. We saw that there is still relative affordability compared to many other markets, but we also don't want to lose that. And so it's what kind of discussions can we have? I think a really important thing is how do we help the locals? Because in economics, there's this phrase called agglomeration, where, okay, there's more people that are moving in, and then you have more salaries, and you have more businesses, and you have more restaurants, and it's good. It helps the market become more attractive. But what it also does is leave younger individuals on the sidelines. It makes it harder for them. Lower income individuals, locals, it's harder for them to keep up. What's the right balance of NIMBYism and growth? I toured some new home communities today where we had large homes, 4,000 square foot homes, in the same communities as 1,700 square foot homes. Usually, there's NIMBYism, there's a fight. I have a big house, I don't want that small house near me, that's gonna impact my home value. Allowing for more diversity of product is really important. What kind of product changes make sense? It's probably not the San Antonio example, but maybe there's some integration into the wee cottages. Maybe it's some of the attached product that we talk about. Entitlement process, I think some of you know that's just going to be something that is going to take a lot more than me just talking about entitlement and regulation and trying to get that under control. But ultimately, as you think about how we can plan, how we can build, what people are willing to pay for, what kind of communities they want to live in, go back to the basics. It's not complicated. When we look at people and we say what matters the most to you, access to restaurant, access to shops, safety, walkability is nice, and also having good schools. So with that, Andrea, I think I ran 1 minute over, but I will welcome you back up. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Allie. I think I speak for everyone when I say I wouldn't have cared how long you ran over. Great, fantastic speech. So with that, I want us to move into the Q&A session. So I'm going to be having two local professionals be joining us on stage. Allie, of course, has this national expertise, but we thought we wanted to get two people who have been in the central Indiana community for a long time to join us here and offer their perspectives. So with that, I would like to introduce our other panelists. Brad Coffing is a research analyst for the MIBOR REALTOR Association. In his role, he provides original research for the association and partners with community organizations on research projects and data requests. Let's welcome Brad to the stage. And then our other panelist is Kelli Mirgeaux. She is the president of SEND, the Southeast Neighborhood Development CDC, where she oversees the organization's operations and programs activities, ensuring compliance with the organization's mission to advocate for housing, economic, and social equity by working with residents, business owners, and community partners to create and maintain inclusive, healthy, and vibrant neighborhoods in Southeast Indy. Let's welcome Kelli. All right, so I do have a question to kick us off. I'm going to go ahead and move forward with that, but I'd like you to come up with your own ideas because then I'll be turning it over to the audience for you to ask questions. So my first question, we know, obviously Allie did a wonderful job in highlighting this, that the housing market has changed dramatically from what it was like as recently as 3 years ago. And even more so when we look further back to when previous generations were buying homes 20 to 30 years ago. What do you see as the biggest difference in the housing market today? And what do you think is the biggest driver of this housing change? I'll go ahead and ask Kelli to respond first.
Well, thank you. Okay. So I think even looking a little bit more prior to 30 years ago, we all know, those familiar with Indianapolis, the conversation of white flight, moving out to the suburbs and such. And I do believe that in the last probably 15 years and such, we've seen a lot of folks and a lot of individuals moving back to Indianapolis and back to these urban neighborhoods, wanting more of that urban lifestyle. And I think that that has certainly created a dynamic change for good and some concerning in some of our neighborhoods, where we are seeing some of that build market rate investment with these new homes that make it challenging for our residents who have been in those neighborhoods for decades, for a lifetime, to remain in their homes. I think that we are also challenged with the fact that with this change and such, a lot of, at least in SEND's territory, which by the way, we are Southeast Indy, we serve a geography of about 55,000 population and such, but the majority of our housing stock in existence right now was built before 1940. And so we have a lot of deteriorating housing, which if you're looking at the, the populations that we serve, our underserved populations, more importantly, the low to moderate income households, and the inability to maintain their house, right? And to age in place, to stay in place, because the cost of repairs exceed what they can actually afford. And so we've been actually seeing that as an incredible challenge to our neighborhoods, and even more so speaking to it when we talk about those sort of predatory messages that neighborhoods will receive, saying, hey, we will come in and we want to buy your house and buy your property and whatnot. And a lot of our homeowners, we hear from them all the time, just confused and concerned about those messages because they may not, they may be in a position where they just are quick to respond to that, right? So they don't have a partner or a person that they can rely upon, an expert, an individual, to kind of talk them through that process. So, yeah.
Great. Brad, would you like to go ahead and add on?
Sure. I would say a couple of things. One, if you look at previous generations, you go back 20 years, one of the things they could do is actually buy a starter home. You can't really do that now. It's really hard to even get them built. If a quote-unquote starter home is on the market, it's not at a starter home price. The other thing that's really changed over time is the way the households look. Households today look very, very different. They're not always mom, dad, 2 kids, and a dog, right? They look very different. People are living alone longer. People live longer too. They want to age in place longer. You're seeing also multi-generational households. What we've built for the last 20, 30 years hasn't kept up with those changing demographics and changing household compositions. So that's another struggle that's really putting pressure on the market because it's not allowing more natural filtration of product to go through the life cycle. So.
And I think that besides what you guys mentioned, land availability is something, even here in Indiana, is something that needs to be discussed, because it's really easy to say, well, why don't we just build more homes? And builders would say, yeah, we can build more homes, but are you willing to drive 40 minutes to an area where there aren't mature trees and there aren't good restaurants there and it hasn't been developed yet? So I think the challenge is, as you look at how growth has occurred, it doesn't matter where you are, usually starts in that urban core, and then you go to the first tier and the second tier and the third tier. And I know that in a lot of cases, even second tier have been built out. And so if we want more homes, you have to move further away, but are people willing to accept it? And I think that's a trade-off that is facing today's generation a lot more than it has in some of the past generations.
Go ahead.
And to just kind of piggyback off of that, even in the urban core, there's still a lot of land that we can build on. The problem is it's expensive to acquire a lot of smaller lots as opposed to going out and clearing an entire cornfield, right? So aggregating those lots is just pricier, time consuming. That being said, we're not completely built out. It's been so much easier and cheaper to build out.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hand off this one of these microphones to Danielle so we can have the audience go ahead and ask. I'm just snatching it from you, Brad. I think
Does anyone have any questions that they wrote down to pass up as well? Okay.
All right. So yes, we'll go ahead and take any questions from the audience. I see a hand over here.
Have any discussions been had with the municipalities outside the core? I live in Irvington, so I live in the city. I'm a realtor. I have several listings in the city that are in the $200,000 range. 2 of them are. But the municipalities are putting so many requests on the builders for how the homes have to look. So therefore, they're not able to keep them affordable. Has there been any discussion around that?
That's actually, I'll go ahead and I'll offer an answer first. Kelli has some additional insights, but I wanted to hop in because I think this directly relates to the Central Indiana housing study that this speaker event is part of. So as part of the housing study, we say Central Indiana because it is. It is, Marion County and the surrounding counties excluding Anderson. So we are having those conversations with the different municipalities around Indianapolis. And to your point, it's just an ongoing dialogue and communicating these issues. So that is a big item that the housing study is intended to address, is this gap that we see between developers and elected officials and planning commissioners. Oh, and I'm sorry, I feel like I cut off Kelli though. Did she have a comment?
Yes, I do.
I do.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
But before I get started, I just want to say that I totally love and appreciate the City of Indianapolis, DMD, Beth is here, so we're going to... I thought about that beforehand. But anyway, yes. Now, what I would say, too, is that the city has released in the last few years their housing infill guidelines and such. I cannot, and when I talk and respond here, I'm totally going to be looking at this from an affordable housing and affordable development lens. So I'm not going to try to speak about market rate development. I'm also going to be speaking very micro to southeast, not entirely micro, because our CDC network is very close and such, but just wanted to make that announcement. Pardon? Oh, yay, good. But what I would say is that with the infill guidelines and some of those, from an affordable housing perspective, it makes it challenging for us because while from a market rate perspective, one might run into a challenge, and that might, I guess the builder at the end of the day, if there's an increase to their bottom line, their total development cost, you might see some reflection in what that is listed as. Affordable housing we do not do that, right? We cannot. We are, our houses are listed based on a plans and specs appraisal. And so we are sort of tied to that listing price, and that we're fine. But the other thing that also does from the affordable development is the timeline of development. I would imagine that if I am side by side a market rate developer, single family home, similar square footage, floor plans and such, we might have a similar construction timeline, but our total development timeline is probably much greater than the market rate. So.
And if I could add one more thing, and it's kind of a devil's advocate to your question, which is there are some builders that they can work with the city, they can change what the home looks like, and then when you drive through your community, it's a good price, but most of us wouldn't buy a house in it. And I've driven through some really ugly cookie cutter communities where it's like, in some ways it does help that there's a little bit, but I think it's just the encroachment in some cases of just too many regulation that's just pushing the price up. But when they cut too much out of the house too, it just becomes kind of wasted land. Vinyl villages.
Gonna say that one. Another question in the back. Oh, I'm sorry, Shannon. I almost skipped over Shannon.
Sorry. Shannon Norman, Department of Metropolitan Development. Sorry, I'm back here. This is just an observation and a question. Allie, I had a chance to hear you speak at ULI at the housing conference, and one of the things we've struggled with here is defining building density, but also talking about building typologies. And that plays into your discussion about attached versus detached. If you could talk a little bit about how the data reflects the density question in terms of just adding more people or adding more housing types, and if that sort of meets out with some of the things you're seeing maybe in other markets or our market.
Yep, and so when we look at different communities across the country, you've probably seen, if you're part of ULI, you probably have seen some of the discussions about the missing middle and how and a lot of you are nodding, so everyone does. Okay, well, anyways, what we have found, and I do work across the country, as you would have seen and heard, what we find is there are communities that can have and share high density attached product and have a really good sales rate and hit a certain price point next to homes that are less dense and have more land, but also hit to another different kind of buyer group. And it kind of goes back to what I said before with the NIMBYism. In a lot of markets, there's that reluctance to mix and commingle those products, commingles the income, commingles the demographics, the life stage, the lifestyle. And what we have found in most cases across the country, it works amazing. You have higher density, and maybe, I think the biggest thing, and actually it was one I think I mentioned, I toured with the builder today, I think the biggest thing is having the infrastructure in place. So you can bring a bunch of people there, but if the roads aren't supporting it or the schools aren't supporting it, it's actually kind of shooting yourself in the foot of trying to get those homes built and get them built quickly. Not sure it directly answered your question, but I do think it's the commingling needs to evolve and has evolved in a lot of markets.
What's crazy is that's how we used to develop for the most part. I mean, if you look at the red line right now, it's one of the old interurban lines, and you look at the way it's built out off of College Avenue. You have your duplexes and then your larger, I mean, this is just kind of going back to basics of what we used to do when we built community, right?
Great. Just a note, I believe most of the audience is familiar with the term, but in case anyone isn't, NIMBY stands for Not in My Backyard. So for those of you who are not familiar with the term. So maybe, that's a great idea, just not here. Why does it have to be here? I think I'd like it better over there. That's what we're referring to.
Which you reminded me too. I think people are also, because of the not in my backyard, it's oftentimes, well, I bought this house and that house is going to bring down the value of my house. And more often than not, that doesn't actually play out in the data. The opposite is YIMBY. So yes, in my backyard, so we're looking for more of that.
All right. Sir, in the back.
Yeah, so I am nodding in a lot of violent agreement with some of what you're saying, and for terminology definition. So you mentioned missing middle, which I sometimes describe to other folks as house scale multifamily, as opposed to like apartment scale multifamily, to give people a sense of it. So, so I'm with the Local Initiative Support Corporation. We are really trying to push forward the idea that there should be some pivot, particularly with regard to affordable housing, away from what a lot of markets are reliant on in terms of LIHTC financed development, and really trying to encourage missing middle housing development or house scale multifamily development by small and mid-sized developers, both for-profit and not-profit, who are really, that's probably really the sweet spot for them in markets. So I would be interested in your reaction to what we think of as the disincentives that are getting in the way of that, so, which we sort of drop into three buckets. One, particularly with regard to affordable housing, it's an issue about subsidy delivery and being efficient with that. Outside of LIHTC, which is kind of an industry and has got a certain amount of efficiency to it, your other subsidies are CDBG and home, much more difficult to deploy, particularly with regard to small and mid-sized for-profit developers who really have to build, just like the LIHTC developers, some level of capacity around how to use those tools, how to financially model their projects and what have you. So that's one disincentive. Disincentive number two is just this issue of design. What we would argue is we have a vacant lot inventory in Indy, 4,000, 5,000 lots, this land that you were talking about, largely undeveloped for decades. Decades, literally. You can drive through neighborhoods, look the same way for years. But if you constrain developers to one-to-one replacement, there's not feasibility. The margin is not there for them to go out and go after that. And what we really want to have is 10, 15, 20 different small and mid-sized developers going after that inventory. But the disincentive, the way the system, the land use and regulatory scheme pushes back on design that is trying to put more than one unit on a lot. I talked to architects, tried to program 6 units horizontally into 2 contiguous lots, spent a year in design review, couldn't get it done, eventually approved to do 2 units, right? One per, that's how hard the system pushes back on that. You can take a PUD approach, but that's costly, takes a lot of time and effort up front. So that's the other disincentive. And the third one just being sort of financing tools that understand what that small and mid-sized developer is trying to do. So those are what we see as the disincentives in the market, and those are all, we think of them as, those are all issues you can do something about. There's no silver bullet, but if you do something about each one of those areas, the disincentives there, you could get some traction and begin to bring this vacant lot inventory back online. And one big reason for cities to really invest in that is because we have this phenomenon of sort of hedge fund, Wall Street backed entities coming in, buying up existing stock and sort of monetizing that. Really dystopian. I find that quite scary. But one way cities can harden, and it's because the supply is so constrained. So one way cities can harden their economies against that kind of profiteering is get all this vacant lot inventory off the sidelines, back on the tax roll, put people on it, and that increased density has all kinds of spin-off benefits. More people, more eyes on the street, public safety benefits,
Sure.
Supports walkability and so forth. So
these are all great comments, but I would love to, expand on this more in a one-on-one conversation or in emails or in public comment. Thank you. No, it's great comments. I did see a question here in the front.
Evan Beatty, associate planner with City of Greenfield. Actually, I'm one of those transplants. My fiance and I moved here from Denver because we couldn't make the numbers work. So we moved out here, and it's still being a bit difficult. And one of the questions I have is regarding the spec building of single-family detached homes for the purpose of renting, and the fact that it's showing up on those sales, it's showing up on an available house, but it never makes it to the buyer's market. Is there any avenue in these types of studies where those numbers are actually taken into account? And if you have any insight on how to better work that through the system so that buyers can get to the market?
There are ways that you can cut the data, but it's usually after the closing of the sale. So what I was showing a lot of was contract sales, and we won't know at a contract sale if it's a primary buyer, if it's an investor. when you look at that discussion, I think it's very tricky thinking about how it has evolved. So in some cases, when the housing market slowed last year and builders had inventory, they were saying, well, yeah, there is a systemic undersupply. There's an undersupply where we need to get more homes built, but you can also have a cyclical oversupply. So builders got to a point last year where some of them were saying, we have more supply than we have buyers, so we need to get rid of these homes. And the groups that said, well, if you drop it by 10%, I'll buy all the homes from you. It was investors coming in and offloading those homes. So that actually propped up the market last year, and I don't even want to advocate for it. I'm not at all advocating for it, but for builders to know that there's a consistent buyer, sometimes it does encourage more building, but like you said, it doesn't always mean that it's encouraging more building for sale. It's maybe a little bit more supply, but it's not.
Greenfield specifically, we have several neighborhoods built specifically from the beginning. We want 100% rental communities.
Yes, okay. And that's then a different arm. That's called built for rent or built to rent, one or the other. Some of you guys know BTR, BFR. Yes, so that will be either builders will do an arm of BFR, or there'll be developers that are specifically doing it. And it's something that you heard in my bio, I meet with the White House. It is something that we talk about, but it's also very hard for them to put policies in place to stop it. I mean, it's just kind of, how the world works kind of thing. So they feel a little bit stuck of how they can do it, but temporarily that side of the market has slowed because cap rates aren't working, and because of the construction costs and higher interest rates, they can't make new deals to pencil. But I will tell you, there is so much money waiting on the sidelines to ramp that right back up.
Yeah, just getting to what Ali said, this is something that we've really grappled with too, and the data are the data, and again, it's not taking a side or the other, but just the policy discussion around that is super difficult. You can come at it from a carrot or a stick perspective, and neither one is very, very applicable right now for the most part. I mean, the market's just so kind of out of whack. I think until we can actually deliver enough product, enough new inventory into the marketplace to bring down the cap to a point where maybe the return's not so high, but it's a really tricky thing to get your head around and to be able to form policy around. It's really hard.
All right, I think we can take one more question from the audience, and then I have a written one I'll address before we transition into the open house. So are there any other questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
Hi, Mark Gradison, Gradison Land Development. We also do custom homes. So one of the things that we face as builders and developers here locally is, and piggybacking on a couple of the other comments before, is the question I have for you, Ali, is and the others, how have you seen other communities around the country battle with this, obviously NIMBYism, but how do we get to good design to where we can have wee cottages or have these other smaller products that the city councilmen and the planners and the elected officials all can get behind? Because it's not that we want to do it and create more vinyl villages necessarily. It's more about getting good product at a more affordable rate, and not the regulation has gotten to be, and Indiana isn't anything like I know the West Coast and South is and such from a regulation perspective, but we still see our share of it and the time frames in order to get through those. So wondering if you have any insight from around the country that we can share with us.
Yep, so I'll start, and do you guys have something to add too? Okay, I'll start. So the biggest thing that I have seen, I don't even know how to, one of the parts I want to say, but I really don't want to offend people. So I'll wait on that one. Okay, the biggest thing, if you think about the wee cottages, so in that case, the way that they were able to get them built, and I know you're using that as an example, but I think it's a helpful example. So in that case, it started from a company called Boulder Creek Neighborhoods. It's a developer that's in Boulder, and that developer was well connected through family, and I think that helped them get that initial pass through. So in that case, it's all about who you know. I think they were able to get that first, here's your chance. We're gonna let you build it, but if you mess up, you're not doing this again. And then they built it, and like I said, they would have seen the same thing I saw, which is people were building equity. Those homes started at 300, now they're at 500. They could not build the homes quick enough. People were willing to say, I'll take a detached garage if you can get me a home that works. And I think that for them, once that foot in the door was done, and once they had the numbers to back the education, they could say the homeownership rate for people with either this income or of this age is this low. We were able to, whatever, we were able to build 1,000 homes. We were able to get those people into the home and get that ladder started, and then talk about the wealth building and how that translates into longer term success for families and what that means. It's an obvious answer, and I'm sorry I can't give better than that, but I think that in some cases it takes the success stories and it takes the first person to be able to do it. And then this is the part that I hate to say, but in a lot of cases it was also having some of the city officials have some younger people that were like, I can't buy a house myself, and having people on that are working at the cities that understand the challenge firsthand, I think has also been beneficial. I think of Anaheim, California. You guys all probably know Disneyland, and Anaheim has just amazing new homes that are being built that are so outside of the box, but when you talk to their city officials, they're all, or a lot of people are under 40 that can't own in Anaheim, that can't own in Southern California, and that are looking at these projects saying, I would actually buy this, and I think that that helps too.
All right, any closing comments or thoughts from our panelists? Just in general. This is your stage, Kelli.
I was just going to say, I'm sorry, yeah. One comment there too is that I'll just give this example, and again, I'm not an expert by any means, but just give one example. I think that a lot of times what you're talking about, you talk about sort of these design standards and such. Number one, what is a regulatory and a non-regulatory sort of, and also looking at the neighborhood characteristics as well, which sometimes happens and sometimes doesn't happen, right? I'm a 17-year resident of Fountain Square. 2 down from me is a 3-story, high vertical, doesn't really fit with the neighborhood characteristics of my street, but it's there, and it was built, and you can probably guess the listing price of it, right? The other thing is, I think when you think about this sort of neighborhood, it's not just about the local elected officials, it's a neighborhood that you're planning on developing in as well, right? There is strong, I love our neighbors, I love our neighborhoods. By all means, if a developer does not go in first and foremost before any plans are made and such and talk to a neighborhood, chances are they're probably going to get stopped. That neighborhood remonstration is what drives, and I love it so much, and if you sort of don't embrace and work with the neighborhoods where you're trying to come into, it ain't going to happen, right? That's just about as honest as I could be with that, so thank you.
All right, please join me. Oh, I'm sorry, all right. Please join me in giving a round of applause, thanking our panelists.